Welcome back. If you're new here tonight, glad you came. Let me ask you something. Have you ever walked into a room and known without any evidence at all that someone had been there before you that day? No smell, no sound, just something in the air that feels recently occupied and wrong. Most of us file that away under tiredness or a long week and move on, but some people follow it, and tonight 7 of them sent back what they found. We have a building in Mumbai where the count was always off by 1. A road in Norway that bent one time too many. A high-rise in Seoul that had already adjusted to someone by the time the actual tenant moved in. And a few others that I think will find specific places to sit in your memory for a while. Lower the lights if you can. Headphones on. If you want to be here every time we do this, the subscribe button is right there. This is the kind of channel you come back to. And if one of these stories lands somewhere particular, leave a comment. We do read them. Let's get into it. The 4th floor closes at 9. I've been coordinating facility maintenance for commercial buildings for 11 years. My current site is a 12-floor commercial tower in the Boundary Kurla complex, the kind of building that houses 3 fintech companies, a law firm and a regional bank branch. My job involves shift rosters, contractor check-ins, access logs, and daily inspection rounds. I am precise in these things. This is relevant to what happened. The 4th floor of that building has been partially unoccupied for about 2 years. The northern wing, 3 offices and a corridor, was vacated when one of the fintech companies downsized and consolidated upstairs. The rooms were cleaned, locked, and officially listed as pending release. Utilities were minimized. Motion sensors were left active for security purposes. I had access to the logs for the first 18 months. Those motion sensors reported nothing. Standard. Nobody was going in. The leasing agent came twice to show the space to prospective tenants. Both visits were logged, both lasted under an hour, everything matched. The discrepancies started in March. The first one was small enough that I logged it as a system check. A motion event was recorded at 2:17 a.m. on a Thursday in the northern corridor of the 4th floor. The cleaning crew had already signed out at 11:30 p.m. The overnight security officer was assigned to the lobby and the basement car park, not the upper floors. I flagged it, tested the sensor, found no fault, and wrote it off as a calibration anomaly. The second event came 8 days later. Same corridor, 2:09 a.m. this time. When the same anomaly repeats at a similar time, I don't write it off. That's a pattern. I checked the access control logs for the 4th floor. The card reader log showed no entries after 6 p.m. on either night. No doors were badged open. The 4th floor has 2 entry points, a stairwell and a lift lobby, both behind access control doors. Nobody had entered according to the system. I requested a review of the corridor CCTV for both dates. The footage was unremarkable. Long black hallway, overhead fluorescence on standby mode. Low amber, not full white. No person visible. No movement. The timestamp matched the sensor log, but the corridor was empty. I noted this discrepancy and moved on. The third event was in April, and this one I caught live. I was doing a late site inspection. I occasionally run these to check lock states and utility panels, and I had my maintenance tablet open to the building management system. I was on the 6th floor when the screen registered a motion event on the 4th, 10:47 p.m. Not 2 a.m. this time. Different. I took the stairs down. The 4th floor smelled normal, stale, and dry, the way unoccupied offices do when the air handling is on low. I walked the northern corridor slowly. My tablet showed the event had originated from the middle section, the second office space. I tried the door locked. I used my master key. The room inside was empty. Desks pushed to the perimeter, the way the previous tenant had left them. The carpet had the faint rectangular impression where a chair mat used to sit. Nothing was out of place. I stood there for a moment. Let the motion sensor register me, it did. The tablet confirmed and then left. What I noticed, and what I should have reported immediately but did not, was this. The carpet impression was not where I expected it. The chair mat from the previous tenant had been centered on the main desk, which was pushed to the north wall. The impression I was looking at was about 1.5 meters east of where it should have been. I told myself the cleaning staff had moved furniture during the vacancy clean. I wrote nothing in the log. The fourth event happened to another member of my team. My assistant coordinator, a man named Suresh, came to me in May and told me quietly that he had gone to the 4th floor northern corridor to check a reported fault with one of the emergency lighting units and had counted the office doors. There were 4. The northern wing has 3 office spaces, 2 standard rooms and 1 larger corner office. 3 doors. Suresh said he had walked the corridor twice because he lost count, and both times he counted 4, he said. He had stood in front of each door in sequence and touched the frame. He got to the 4th and realized he had no record of it. He said the door looked the same as the others, same metal frame, same card reader panel, but the panel had no LED indicator, no power. He knocked, nothing. He tried the handle, locked. He came to me. I went with him that afternoon. We walked the corridor together. There were 3 doors. Suresh was quiet for a long time. He said, "Maybe I was tired." I said probably yes and left it there. But I went back alone the following morning at 7 a.m. before any staff arrived, and I walked that corridor again. 3 doors. I photographed all 3 with my phone, including the frames, the card readers, the distance between each one, all normal. I stood at the end of the corridor and looked back. The measurements were wrong. I know that corridor. I had inspected it a dozen times. The space between the 2nd and 3rd office doors was longer than it should have been, not dramatically. Maybe 2 meters more than I remembered. You would not notice it if you weren't looking at it with a tape measure in mind, but I had done this work for 11 years. I know what a standard commercial floor plan looks like. I did not tape measure it. I do not know why I didn't. I just walked back out and stood in the lift lobby for a moment looking at the wall-mounted floor plan. The floor plan showed 3 doors. The distances matched the floor plan. The floor plan showed 3 doors. The distances matched the floor plan. I was looking at the plan, and the plan was correct, and something in the corridor was not matching it, and I chose to decide that I was the one who was wrong. The motion events continued through May and into June, clustered now between 1 and 3 a.m., 4 or 5 per week. The security officer had started noticing them too and flagged them to me twice. I told him it was a sensor calibration issue being reviewed. That was not true. What changed things was a maintenance contractor, a plumbing technician named Ravi, who came in to check a water pressure concern on the 4th floor in June. He came back to the lobby and told me the 3rd office space at the end of the corridor was occupied. I said that was not possible. He said there was a desk near the window, a chair, a coffee cup on the desk. He had not tried the door because the room was access controlled and he was not authorized to enter it. But he had seen it through the frosted glass panel at the top of the door. I told him I would handle it. I went to the building management system and pulled the utility data for the 4th floor northern wing. The power draw log showed a low but consistent consumption signature from the 3rd office space, not 0. The way a vacant light-off room should read, but not large, equivalent to a monitor on standby maybe, or a small appliance left running. It had been drawing that load for approximately 4 months. I reviewed the original handover checklist when the tenant vacated. Everything had been cleared and confirmed. The power should have been isolated to standby only on that circuit. I submitted a formal review to building management that afternoon and requested the leasing agent authorize a full inspection of the space. It took 11 days to arrange. When we opened the room, there was nothing in it. No desk by the window, no chair, no cup. The floor was clear. The power draw, per the electrician who came with us, was within standard range for a vacant space with minimal standby systems. The carpeting had 2 impressions, one near the window, one about 1 meter from the door, as if something heavy had sat there and been recently moved. The room smelled faintly like coffee. Nobody else mentioned it. I didn't either. The motion events stopped after that inspection. I do not know why. What I do know is this: when I reviewed the full motion sensor log from January through June, I found something I had not noticed before. The events were not random nights. They corresponded with minor variation to the dates when Ravi, Suresh, and I had each been in that corridor for regular inspections. Not every visit, but most of them. The events came within a day or two of each visit, as if something was tracking when that floor was being checked and timing itself accordingly. I should have taped that corridor. I should have written down my observation about the distances in May. I should have flagged the power anomaly as soon as the contractor mentioned it instead of waiting 11 days. I work in facts and logs. I do not know what to log here. So I have not logged it. What I have done is reduce my solo site inspections to daytime hours only. I have also added a new item to my pre-closed checklist: motion sensor review for the 4th floor northern wing, signed off daily. It has been cleaned since June, but I check it every day, and I count the doors every time. 3. And every time I spend about 2 seconds longer than I should before I write down the number. She knew my shift. I worked 12-hour nights at a district hospital in Vestfold for 7 years. Long drives, bad weather, the usual. I am not someone who notices strange things or goes looking for them. I want to be upfront about that. In winter, the road from the main highway to our facility runs through about 6 kilometers of farmland. Very flat, very dark, no other traffic after about 10 p.m. I drove it 4 nights a week for years without thinking twice. The first time I saw her, I thought it was a colleague walking the road. That was my brain's first explanation, and it was reasonable. It was around 2:30 a.m. Someone was walking the road in a dark coat, moving in the same direction as my car, maybe 300 meters ahead. I slowed and pulled alongside. A woman, 40s maybe, dark coat, hair loose. She glanced at me and I stopped. I rolled the window down and asked if she needed a lift. She said no thank you. She was almost there, I said. There's nothing out here. She smiled and kept walking. I drove on. I told myself she was probably a local I didn't know. Maybe someone from one of the farmhouses, out for reasons I didn't understand. I filed it away. 3 weeks later, same road, same time, 2:30 a.m., same woman, same coat, same direction. I stopped again. This time I asked her name. She gave one, a common Norwegian name, nothing remarkable. I asked where she was going. She said the same thing, almost there. I asked if she needed a ride. She said no. I drove away and called the hospital admin line to ask if any overnight staff walked that route. They said no. All staff drove or were picked up. The third time was in February, 2:33 a.m. She was already there when my headlights caught her, already walking, already in the same direction. I did not stop. I drove past slowly. As I passed, she turned her head to look directly at me. Just her head, not her body. I watched her in the mirror for about 30 seconds until the dark closed over her. She never got smaller. She just became impossible to see. I transferred to a day shift position at a different facility that spring. I told my manager it was personal circumstances. It was easier that way. Here's what I have thought about since. The name she gave me on the second night was one I had not heard before, but 2 months after I transferred, I learned it was the name of a nurse who had worked that road route 15 years earlier, a woman who died in a car accident on that same stretch during the winter night shift. I don't know what that means. I don't know if it means anything at all. What I keep coming back to is the way she said it both times, almost there, not like a stranger answering a question, like someone answering a question they had already been asked many times and expected to be asked again. For 31 years, I believe in documentation. I believe in clear accounting. What I am about to describe does not have a clean explanation, and I have been sitting with that for 11 years now, which is why I'm writing it down at last. My wife's family has a traditional house in a village in northern Tochigi, stone staircase on the north side that goes up to a small shrine on the hillside behind it. The stairs are original, perhaps 140 years old. They are uneven, worn, sometimes mossy in wet weather. We visited regularly. I had climbed those stairs perhaps 40 or 50 times. My wife's great-uncle, a man who had lived in that house his entire life, died in the spring of 2013 at 94. We came for the funeral and stayed 5 days. The house was full of family from all the regional branches, many of whom I had never met. An appropriate amount of movement and noise in remembrance. The shrine at the top of the stairs was visited by several family members during those days, which was expected. On the third day, the afternoon before the main ceremony, I walked out to the garden to have a moment of quiet. There was an old man seated on the stone bench near the base of the stairs. I did not recognize him. He was dressed simply, very neatly. He looked at me when I came out and nodded. I nodded in return. I assumed he was a relation I had not been introduced to, some elderly cousin or neighbor come to pay respects, he said. Without preamble, "Don't go up the steps today." I said something polite, perhaps, that I had not planned to. He said it again. Just that. "Don't go up the steps today." And then he looked back toward the garden. I went inside and asked my wife who the old man at the bench was. She went to look. When she came back, she said there was nobody at the bench. I went to look myself. He was gone. The bench was empty. The garden has only one gate, and it connects to the inner courtyard where 3 other family members had been sitting for the past hour. None of them had seen anyone come through. I did not go up the steps that day. I'm not entirely certain why. My primary feeling was mild confusion rather than fear. But there had been something in the way the man spoke, a directness. No social preamble, no explanation offered. That had the quality of instruction rather than conversation. He had not said, "Be careful." He had said, "Don't go." My wife's cousin went up the stairs that afternoon with his young son. They were about 2/3 of the way up when a section of the 4th step, old stone apparently cracked through beneath the surface, gave way. The cousin caught himself on the rail. The child caught himself against the cousin's back. Neither was seriously hurt, though the child scraped both palms on the stone. The step had fractured clean through at the base. The family discussed it that evening. The house caretaker said the crack had probably been there for some time, hidden under the moss and the wear of use. My wife asked me later if I had noticed anything wrong with the steps. I told her no, I hadn't gone up. She asked why not. I told her I hadn't felt like it that afternoon. This was not the full truth. But the full truth required explaining the old man on the bench, and I didn't know how to do that in a way that didn't sound embarrassing. I realize that is an odd thing to prioritize when there is a small child who scraped both hands on a broken step. After the ceremony, while I was packing the car, I asked the house caretaker, the actual one, a man in his 60s named Nishida, who had cared for the property for 20 years, whether any elderly man had been in the garden during the afternoon. He said no. He had been in and out of the garden all day. I described the man, very old, neatly dressed, seated at the stone bench by the stairs. Nishida looked at me for a moment. He said the bench has been there since the great-uncle built it. He liked to sit there in the afternoons, every day for most of his life. I said that many people must have sat there over the years. Nishida nodded. Then, quietly, he added, "I heard he always worried about those steps. His whole life he kept saying they needed to be repaired." He said nothing else. I did not ask anything else. I have thought about this carefully, because I am someone who thinks carefully. The most I can say with honesty is this. I received a warning from a man who should not have been there about a thing that was about to happen, and I cannot account for either the warning or the man. The steps were repaired the following summer. I have climbed them several times since. I always count the steps as I go. I do not entirely know why I do this. There are 22 every time, 22. The cart on ISIL, 7. I want to be clear up front. I don't believe in this kind of thing. I'm saying that because I know how this sounds, and I want you to know I know how it sounds before I say it. I work the night replenishment shift at a regional distribution warehouse in northeastern Ohio. 6 nights a week, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I've been there almost 4 years. The job is physical and systematic. Pallets in, product to shelves, damaged stock to the reject bay. There is a right way to do it, and I do it that way. We use heavy metal utility carts for moving product between the receiving dock and the storage aisles, four-wheeled, about 5 feet long, bent metal handle at each end. We have 12 of them. We chain them to the dock rail at end of shift. I know which carts have the bent wheel or the loose handle because I'm the one who filed the maintenance tickets. About 8 months in, I started noticing one of the carts, number 7, because that's what the floor supervisor had written on it in red marker. Was not where I'd left it in the mornings. Not missing, not far, just moved 10 feet, sometimes facing the other direction. I blamed the cleaning crew. Then I blamed the security guard. Then I blamed new staff not knowing the chain-up protocol. One night in February, I stayed 15 minutes past my shift because a product count was off. I chained all the carts myself. I personally locked number 7 to the dock rail. I have a way of checking. I pull twice. Then once, I did this. At 6:22 a.m., the incoming morning crew supervisor sent me a photo. Number 7 was in the center of aisle 7. Still locked. The lock was still attached to the cart. The rail attachment point was clean. No damage. The chain was still threaded through both rings. It was locked to itself instead of to the rail. I don't have an explanation for that. I have looked at it from multiple angles, and I have nothing. What I will say is this. When my supervisor mentioned that a night shift worker had collapsed next to that specific cart 3 years before I started, a person who didn't show up to sign out, my first reaction was irritation. Because if that's true, this was already happening before I noticed it, and I just didn't know. That bothers me more than the cart. I don't like being the last one to realize something has been going on. What? The painter wrote at the top. I do documentary and cultural photography. I have worked across parts of Central and Eastern Europe for about 12 years, specifically photographing traditional wooden architecture, churchyards, and rural craftsmanship in areas where these things are disappearing faster than people realize. In the summer of 2018, I spent 3 weeks in the Maramureș region of northern Romania. The area is well known for its preserved wooden churches, some of which are UNESCO listed. I had arranged access to photograph several of the smaller, less documented village churches, not the famous ones, but the quiet local ones on unpaved roads that don't appear in tourist guides. The village I was staying in had a small Orthodox church with unusual exterior painted icons around the doorframe. I won't name the village here. I have reasons for this that will become clear. The priest, Father Petru, was in his late 70s and gave me access willingly. He asked only that I not photograph the internal altar or the oldest icons in the chancel. I agreed without hesitation. The exterior painting around the doorframe was extraordinary, old blue and ochre pigment, slightly faded. Icons of saints flanking a central painted inscription in Church Slavonic. Father Petru told me it was a protective blessing, written there when the church was built, to consecrate the threshold. He said in the old custom, such blessings were meant to let the faithful through and stop what should not enter. He said it plainly, matter-of-factly. I photographed the doorframe extensively over 2 days. On the second evening, reviewing the photographs on my laptop, I noticed something in the top segment of the doorframe, something I had not seen with my own eyes while shooting, in the painted inscription, in the space between 2 of the characters. There was a secondary inscription, smaller, same pigment, but in a different hand. Not Church Slavonic, not Romanian, not anything I could identify. I showed it to Father Petru the following morning. He looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he took his glasses off and looked again. He asked me twice to zoom in on the specific section. He said, without explanation, "You should not have been able to see that." I asked what he meant. He didn't answer that directly. He said the inscription at the top of the doorframe was the final line of the blessing, the part addressed to what was outside, not to what was inside. He said that line was written in a form meant to pass unread by the faithful, so they would walk under it without attention. I asked what the secondary inscription said. Inscription at the top of the doorframe was the final line of the blessing, the part addressed to what was outside, not to what was inside. He said that line was written in a form meant to pass unread by the faithful. so they would walk under it without attention. I asked what the secondary inscription said. He told me he could not read the script, but he had seen it once before, decades ago, when a restorer had come to the church and pointed it out. That restorer had taken a rubbing and sent it to the diocese. Father Petru had never received a response. He had prayed over the doorframe himself and decided not to escalate it further because, and this is how he said it, he was not certain it was his concern. I asked what he thought it was. He said very quietly, something that knew the blessing well enough to add to it. He said this the way you might describe a property of the building, not alarmed, just precise, as if this was simply a fact he had been holding for a long time. That evening, one of the photographs from the first day displayed incorrectly on my laptop. The image was rotated 180 degrees, just that one photograph, the one from directly below the painted inscription. Rotating it showed the doorframe upside down with the secondary inscription at the bottom now below the threshold. In that orientation it looked, and I'm aware of how this sounds, less like a decoration and more like a note, addressed not upward but downward, toward whoever was standing at the base of the door. I left the village 2 days early. I told myself it was schedule related. Back in Warsaw, I showed the photographs to a colleague who specialized in historical religious iconography. He examined the secondary inscription for several weeks. He told me eventually that it shared structural similarities with an early form of votive notation, text addressed not to God or the saints, but to a different category of addressee. He declined to name that category directly. He did say one thing I have not been able to put down since. He said the blessing on that doorframe was very good, very old, properly constructed. That kind of blessing, he said, if made correctly, would stop most things. Most? He said something had read it carefully enough to understand what it would not stop. A folder I have not opened in 2 years. I don't know what I'm waiting for. Exactly. I just know I haven't deleted them, and had left a note at the top of the door, in the one place the faithful were instructed not to look, saying so. I do not return to that region. I still have the photographs. I keep them in a folder I have not opened in 2 years. I don't know what I'm waiting for exactly. I just know I haven't deleted them. Whoever lived here before me. I moved into a studio apartment in Nohon-gu in March of my second year at university. It was a sublet. The original tenant had left for a year abroad, and the arrangement went through a housing agency. Plain one-room unit on the 14th floor. Kitchen shelf. Built-in closet. A window facing east. Nothing special about it. I'll be honest, I'm not the most organized person. I kept odd hours. My sleep schedule was all over the place. I mention this because it's relevant to how long it took me to notice anything. The first thing was the closet. The built-in closet had a left section and a right section. I hung my clothes on the right. The left I left mostly empty, just some boxes I hadn't unpacked. About 5 weeks in, I noticed the hangers on the left side were no longer pushed to the back like I'd left them. They were spread out evenly across the rail. Not my clothes. The rail was still empty, just the hangers spread wide, as if clothes were already hanging between them. I figured I had done this at some point and forgotten. I pushed them back to one end. 2 days later, spread out again. Then the temperature, I kept the AC unit set to 23 degrees for sleeping. About 6 weeks in, I started waking up and finding it set to 20. Not off, not broken, set to 20, running cold. I'd change it back in the morning. Next night, 20 again. I checked if the remote had a timer function I had accidentally set. It didn't have one. I checked if somehow a neighboring unit could affect it, which I knew didn't make sense, but I was trying to think of anything. The third thing was a glass. I have 2 drinking glasses. I use one, the second one I kept in the left side of the kitchen shelf where I never reached. At some point I can't pinpoint exactly when it stopped being in the cabinet and started appearing on the counter. Not fallen, placed, on the side of the counter closest to the window. I moved it back to the shelf. It came back to the counter. I genuinely thought I was sleepwalking. I bought a cheap motion detector app, propped my phone facing the kitchen and the closet, and left it running for 3 nights. On the second night, the app logged 2 motion events, one at 2:10 a.m. near the closet, one at 4:47 a.m. near the kitchen counter. The footage was dark and low quality. I couldn't see anything in either clip, just a slight shift in the darkness in the area where the events had registered. I called a friend and described the situation without mentioning the footage. She thought I had a ventilation issue causing air movement. She offered to come look. I said it was fine. I looked up the previous tenant. The housing agency had given me a standard handover sheet, and the name was on it, a woman in her early 30s gone abroad for her master's program. I found her social media. She looked entirely ordinary. She looked fine, but her last post before she left was from the apartment. A photograph of the east-facing window at sunrise, a cup of tea on the counter. Same counter. Same position where the glass kept appearing. The caption said, roughly translated, "Already missing this view. The morning light here is hard to replace." She had lived there for 4 years. The post was dated 3 days before I moved in. I've been trying to figure out what bothers me most about that. I think it's this. The glass kept coming back to the counter by the east window. The morning light window. The window she had photographed from for 4 years. And the temperature, I don't know for certain. But 20 degrees is a specific sleeping preference. The preference of someone who ran warm, or someone who had lived in that exact unit long enough to have it written into their habits and into the air of the place itself. The closet hangers spread across the rail, as if clothes are still hanging there. I moved out at the end of the lease. I didn't renew. The last thing I noticed, the day I was returning the keys, was that the glass was back in the cabinet, left side pushed to the back. Exactly where I had originally found it on move-in day, like it had been put away ready for whoever came next. Exactly where I had originally found it on move-in day, like it had been put away, ready for whoever came next. Exactly where I had originally found it on move-in day, like it had been put away, ready for whoever came next. Exactly where I had originally found it on move-in day, like it had been put away, ready for whoever came next. The same town twice. I drove the Oaxaca to Mexico City overnight route for 9 years. The highway cuts through mountains, small towns, long curves. Nothing unusual if you know it, which I did. I knew every kilometer marker on that route. I drove it twice a week, sometimes 3 times when there was extra work. This happened once in 9 years. I'm not a person who makes things bigger than they are. I'm telling you this because it still bothers me, and I would rather say it plainly. We were a few hours out of Oaxaca, past the grade where the road turns north. I had 13 passengers. The route has a scheduled rest stop at a small town, a paved plaza, a fuel station, a row of closed vendor stalls at night. We stopped there, passengers off for 15 minutes. I drank water. I checked the log. We continued. About 40 minutes later, I came around a long curve and the town was there again. Same plaza, same fuel station, same closed vendor stalls, same layout exactly. I slowed down. The kilometer marker on the roadside should have put me well past that town. I had not taken a wrong turn. There was nowhere on that stretch to turn off. I pulled to the edge of the road and checked my log. The rest stop was in the log. Departure time was in the log. Everything matched. I checked the odometer. The distance since the stop was correct for 40 minutes of normal driving. I sat there for about 2 minutes. Then I made the turn into the plaza a second time. I stopped the bus. I got out. I walked to the fuel station. I recognized it. I recognized the hand-painted advertising on the side wall. I walked around to the back. There was a barrel I had noticed on the first stop because it was painted in unusual yellow. It was still there. Most of the passengers were asleep. One woman near the front was awake and asked if something was wrong with the route. I said no, small delay, and got back in. I drove on. The town did not appear a third time. I never reported it. What would I say? What I have thought about since is the yellow barrel behind the fuel station. When I went around the back the second time, during the second stop, it was in the same place, but it had been moved slightly, maybe half a meter. as if someone had pushed it aside to make room for something, and hadn't finished. That town was not a different town that looked the same. I knew that route. There was only one town in that position. It just happened twice, and between those two times, something had moved the barrel. I think about what was moving it. I don't know why I keep thinking about that specifically. It's just a barrel. But I think about what needed the space and whether it was expecting us to come through again, and whether it had been waiting at that point on the road long before I drove it. That was 7 tonight. Different places, different years, different kinds of wrong. The one from the 4th floor in Mumbai I keep coming back to. The sensor events that clustered around the inspection dates. Not random. Timed. Thank you for being here for this one. Get some rest if you can. And if something in your own day stopped adding up recently, if you counted something and the number came back different, maybe don't think too hard about it tonight. I'll be back soon.